the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 697. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. This week, we talk with Jardena London. We discussed her book, Cultivating Transformation, A Leader's Guide to Connecting the Soulful and the Practical, second edition. Being soulful sounds fluffy, but it isn't. It's critical for delivering lasting change. Jardena is a business transformation consultant, author, keynote speaker, and certified facilitator of Dare to Lead, Brene Brown's groundbreaking training program for organizations based on creating courageous workplaces. Jardena is also the founder of soulsatwork.org, which is focusing on leading a movement to create workplaces that nourish our souls and exude positive energy. Check out her recent book, Cultivating Transformations, A Leader's Guide to Connecting the Soulful and the Practical. Are you ready to get soulful at work? It's time for the interview. Jardena London, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I am really excited. I'll be honest with you. I started skimming your new book, Cultivating Transformations, and we'll worry about the subtitle in a second, and with the idea of just skimming it. And this is where I say, I hate you because now I'm actually reading it line by line. It's actually really powerful, and I was... When you get words like soulful in the title, I'm not always sure. It's like, ooh, that sounds a little squishy. So let's just start with something like, what's your definition of soulful, and why is that important in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I went around and around on using the word soulful or what word we could use. And listen, I have degrees in computer science, math, and business, and I have an MBA. So really soulful was not in my plan, but it's just so important. So the way that I explain soulful to people and why I ended up using that word despite all the negative feedback I got, I think the easiest way to think about it is looking at the opposite. So what is it like when we don't have soul in the workplace? Right? What is it like when the workplace is soul crushing or soul sucking? Right? That's easy. We know exactly what that is.
Right.
So that's when you come to work and you're frustrated and you don't feel like you're making progress and you don't want to be there. And it just kind of sucks the life out of you, sucks all your energy out. That's soulless. And it can be you as an individual, and it can be like we feel like our company is soulless, right? It can be at both levels. So soulful is quite simply the opposite. So anyway, on the flip side, the soulful is you go to work, it gives you energy, it makes you fulfilled, you feel good, right? You're bringing your whole self to work, right? It's sort of that intangible quality of being whole.
Is that actually possible? I mean, outside of a few people who might have, an intense amount of passion, you're walking down 8th Avenue, and in New York, going building to building, and I've done that many times in my life. I would suggest that most people, even if the workplace might be soulful, aren't going in with that attitude.
Well, the first thing is you shouldn't be on 8th Avenue. If you go to 5th Avenue, that's where people are soulful.
Oh.
No, I'm joking. Yeah, 8th Avenue is not a happy place. I'm joking, 8th Avenue. Do I think it's possible? I do think that human beings are designed to be soulful in their lives, and we've somehow created a structure for the workplace that has sucked that out of it. I don't think that it has to be like that. I think we're accepting it without questioning why are we making our 8 hours of our day or more probably, right, miserable? Like, why would we live like that as human beings? And we're kind of accepting that as a truth. And I'm not sure if you look through the course of human history, that's how it always was. I think it's a industrial revolution phenomenon.
Before we get into the meat, I'm always intrigued. And again, here's where the book started to hook me. And that is early on when you were talking about, early in the book, when you're talking about why you wrote the book. And it almost felt like a throwaway line, but I'm sure that if you wrote it down, it probably wasn't. And you wrote down that you admitted that you actually wrote this at least partially for yourself. I am always intrigued by authors that recognize that. When did you come to that realization that you were actually writing the book at least partially for you?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about how the book came to be, and maybe that will answer your question. I didn't want to write a book. So let's start there, right? I have a colleague that I worked with, Phil Purrington, who kept encouraging me to write. We were consultants together. He kept encouraging me to write down some of the stuff that I do as a consultant. And I'm busy. I'm busy. I didn't want to write a book. And he kept calling me and saying, just write down an outline. And then he'd call me in 2 weeks and go, how's the outline for your book? And I go, which of the books that I'm not actually writing are we talking about, Phil? I'm not writing it. It sounds like a great idea, but I'm not doing it. I'm busy. And then he was like, come on, you got to write it. And he calls me back 2 weeks later, and I emailed him the first draft of the book. And he said, what happened? You didn't sound like you were going to write the book. And I was like, I just pooped it out one day. It just came out. So did I write it for myself? It was just one of those things that was in me and needed to come out for whatever reason. It's not like I was like, I'm going to write a great book and sell 1 million copies. It's just like, this information is in there. It needs to be out there, and whatever that means. So I kind of just trusted the universe with that.
Okay, cool. Interesting. Words are critically important. I think we all, they are our medium, whether it's being written down or talking, things like that. Words are important. 2 words early on you walked through the definition of, and transformation and transformational leadership, rather than really exploring the definitions, which I think the readers can do by diving into the book. Mm-hmm. Why do you think it's so hard to agree on definitions of those terms?
Yeah. So, and that transformation is one of those words, it was a buzzword and now it's going out of favor, just like we ruin every word when we overuse it. But the thing with transformation is there's so much, we know that the world is changing and we need to change with it. But there's also a feeling like the world isn't really changing that much. Really, what's important isn't really changing. And there's also this whole thing about we don't want to change people. Right. So we should always be transforming. So is it a one-time deal? Is it part of our DNA? So there's this backlash against the word that it's sort of becoming adaptive and not like a one-time transformation. And I agree with that. Like, I do think we need to become adaptive. But in order to become adaptive, there's some transformation that needs to happen. So that's, the word is what the word is. I don't know that. You see these transformation departments popping up everywhere and people have transformation in their title now. I don't know that that's sustainable because it will eventually become adaptable and part of our DNA. But in order to get over that hump, we've got to do a push.
So do you think it really will become part of our DNA?
Well, just like all of, a lot of times people ask me about, well, is Agile a fad? Is it a business fad? Is it, a flavor of the day? Well, just like anything else, parts of it will become part of our DNA and parts of it may not, but it won't always be an initiative like it is now, right? Just like all of the things that have come and gone, some have stuck around and we just don't call them that anymore.
Right.
We just do it. It's part of what we do.
Well, it's hard to call something a fad after 20 some odd years too. That's sort of a long fad.
But some of those fads, we don't call it by its branded name anymore. It's just how we work.
Right. Well, it stops being a fad, right? Your definition, I guess I am going to pick on the definition just a little bit because I think there's some things to think about in there. You wrote, a transformational leader is part spiritual leader, part work manager, part inspirer, and part community builder. Transformational leaders breathe life into the organization. That definition, right, packs a lot of things in there that I would suggest, having spent a lot of time in normal hierarchical organizations, don't exist in most leaders, might here and there. How does that definition jive with, common practice today? Do you think MBA, having an MBA also, do you think MBA schools teach spiritual and part, work manager, part inspirer as leadership?
Oh, you're asking the tricky question. Boy, I don't want to go down the path of picking on the MBA structure, but we can go down that path. No, of course. I don't think that I think that MBA set us up for a very rigid definition of leadership. I think that they actually stop us from that thinking outside the box leadership, the innovative leadership. I mean, I got my MBA many years ago, so I'm not going to say, I know that there are more classes now that may be more about innovation, design thinking. That's wonderful. But no, I do think that MBA thinking MBA programs narrow your thinking. But in your question about like, how do we have leaders like that? So the other reason I wrote this book is because it is a hard job and we don't teach it. And people in this job get fired on a regular basis. The book sort of grew out of a talk I did called How to Lead a Transformation Without Getting Fired. Because it is so easy to get fired in this job because it's hard, right? You're asked to manage the work. You have to be an inspirer. There is a spiritual element to it, whether you like it or not. And you're being asked to go against everything that's status quo while not offending anybody, right? It's a really difficult job. So that is actually why I wrote the book, to sort of help people in this role be grounded, because it's so hard. And there's nobody in your organization that's going to mentor you or to help you along, because you're forging new ground.
Part of the whole leadership discussion, and we won't pick on Greenleaf for a second, because I think people take him out of context. And we talk about that brand of leadership. Organizations don't really like leaders that attract people and build large followings in the ranks as a general rule. That seems to be sort of a problem with the hierarchy. A few of the people I've interviewed over the past few years have made strenuous arguments that agile leaders, those that are following this sort of transformational path, agile, those forms of leadership are not promotable. How do you react when there is a cadre of well-meaning and well-thought-out gurus, consultants, pundits out there saying it's great to lead a transformation, but you can't move up the hierarchy without the sharp elbow skills that are sort of at odds with many of these tactics?
Well, I guess what I have to say about that is, if your goal is to move up the hierarchy and get promoted, this is not the job for you. I mean, this is a calling. And I talk about that in the book. This is a calling that you will do not to get promoted. So I often have people say, I'm taking this transformation leader job, so I can get promoted. And if that's your goal, you're going to make some bad decisions. So it really isn't. I'm not going to say that you can't get promoted, because you can.
Of course.
But if that's why you're doing it, you're not going to be successful. So can you get promoted? If you are a really good transformation lead and you actually are able to change the structure in the organization, it will be an organization that you can get promoted in. But if you're doing it just to get promoted, you're not going to be good at being a transformation lead, and you're not going to get promoted, if that makes sense.
Isn't that like a little bit like a catch-22 in both cases?
It's a catch-22 if you are doing it for the wrong reasons, right. Yes. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, so one of the things I talk about a lot is metrics. People don't know, organizations, old school, right, that are in the old paradigm, don't know how to measure a transformation. So you're going to be asked, that's one of the things you're going to be asked. How do I measure your performance as a transformation leader? And you get to figure that out. Right. You get to say, here's how you can measure me and look at how great I'm doing. Right. I mean, it's sort of like the fox watching the hen house, but you get to architect that. So it's a virtuous cycle if you set up an organization in which you can be successful. It's a vicious cycle if you are trying to fit into the current way of working while promoting new ways.
If you were to give someone advice on how to measure their transformation, in a virtuous way, not that the other way.
Right.
What one piece of advice would you give them?
I think we're doing it a lot in the Agile community already, actually. I'm very big on the outcome-based metrics. And So as part of that, and we do this, like if you look at OKRs, that's the structure a lot of people are using. And I think it's a great structure. If you use it to its advantage, of course, you can use anything badly, but if you're using it for outcome-based measurement, I think it's great. And if you're using those decisions, it's not to show that you're doing a great job. It's to make decisions and pivot. And then that gets you down the path of super high performance.
So I'm doing a transformation. What's one outcome that I've never heard of OKRs? I don't understand outcome. What would be one outcome that people should think about as part of that?
Well, ultimately, of course, the lagging indicator is that you have improved business results, right? I mean, that's what you want. We have more revenue, we have lower costs. Really, more revenue is probably the better thing, or higher profit margins, or higher profit total. In terms of then how do I link that to the work that I'm doing as a transformationalist, you can measure adaptability, right? You want to be able to measure that adaptability of how much more quickly can I respond as an organization? How much more quickly do I get to value? So those are the things to look at.
So those all make the most sense where you have a product paradigm, the things that you're touching in terms of the work that you're doing affects directly those things that are on that product line and part of that value chain. But let's face it, there are a substantial portion of most organizations' population that are there at best to be enablers, keep the lights on, those sorts of things. Are they transformable?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and an enabler is super transformable, as you say. And it's the same reasons. Is that enabler promoting business results? Mm-hmm. Right? So are we getting those business results, and how am I enabling those better today and in a more flexible and adaptable way than I was yesterday?
When you're going down the path of transformation, it's not just all those people that are directly tied to the product. It's the entirety of the organization.
Absolutely. And if you think about it too, if we look at the flip side of it, so yes, can I enable business results? That's a great question. But if you look at how it happens in a lot of organizations today, the enablers are not only not enabling, but they are actually preventing business results, right? Like they're blocking, they're an obstacle. So how can we remove those obstacles before we even then get to the point of making it leverageable?
But Jardena, if we enable a free flow of value, then people will do things like, they'll do things wrong and will get in trouble and will get sued. How do you have those conversations that are fear-based? And obviously some of them are true, right? There are all sorts of wonderful risks in the world, but just fear, I think, gets in the way of a lot of transformation or change or paradigm shift, whatever the word we want to use for that is. As a leader, how would you have that conversation?
Yeah. So you're presenting two different things. You're presenting the get in trouble in our current paradigm at work. And then you've also presented that we could get sued, which is a reality. But let's talk about the we get sued, because I've had really transformative conversations. And I give the example, if you're in an organization with like some kind of a compliance or regulatory organization, and then a product development organization, right? Those two are always at odds because, and I think about sometimes when I go to Disney World, I never did work with Disney, just to say that. But when I go to Disney World, I think to myself, wow, they created this ride that no one's ever seen before, and this experience. And how did they keep it safe? Like that must have been some conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So when I think about a compliance organization and a product development organization, when the compliance organization's goal is to reduce risk, and the product development organization's goal is to produce revenue, really, in products, they're at odds. But when you start when you get their goals aligned, what's the real goal here? It's to have a thriving and successful company, right? Then you can have the conversation where, and I've actually done this, it's wonderful, where you bring those two groups together and align on what is our purpose? Why are we here? Now, how can we produce products and reduce the risk at the same time, right? It's about managing those tensions, those polarities across groups. Instead of saying, and what we've done in the past, I'm sure you've seen this, you put those two groups in a room and you say, battle it out. And then everybody loses, right? There's a compromise and everybody loses instead of some kind of a collaboration and everybody wins.
Sounds easy. Sounds like it should be readily apparent. But as you say, I know I've seen people locked in the room, super glue the door closed, and let the best person win kind of scenario. And I don't think that's that rare.
No.
Don't think I want to be around those, but I don't think it's that rare. Why are we still having that conversation in at the end of 2021, at the beginning of 2022?
Because we have a belief, we have a culture that competition is optimal. So let's have conflicting goals and go battle it out and we'll come up with the best answer. But that's really not true. So starting with what are our common goals and then working out the differences from there is way more effective than saying, let's take conflicting goals and battle it out. Like that's just not the best setup, right? That's structurally setting them up for failure.
Part of the organization actually has to get aligned to make that happen.
Yep. And that's about creating aligned and shared goals.
Is that something that a team can do? Is that something a department can do? Is that something a product line can do? Is that something the C-suite has to do?
So a department can be cross-department and you can do it. And I've done this I talk about it in the book, across departments. I talk about product development and finance where we did this. So you can do it across departments, but it's much more effective if you're doing it across the organization, right? Like if it's top down, then it will flow, but you can start anywhere.
If somebody said, Jardena, loved your Cultivating Transformations, a Leader's Guide to Connecting the Soulful and Practical. But you know what? I can only remember one thing. What one thing would you actually want people to remember?
I think that the most important thing to remember is, well, I guess the subtitle of the book, as you alluded to before, is that soulfulness and practical results, right? Tangible, practical, tactical are not two different things. So we've treated like that for years, right? Where it's like we have the team building activities over here, and then we have the work over here. And those are like maybe HR does some like feel good stuff, and then we've got the work. And those are not two different things. Those are the same thing. Because that feel good stuff, I'm just call it feel good, but it's not just about feeling good.
Understood.
That is the fuel that's feeding the tangible results. Mm-hmm. So these two things need to come together. It's one thing. So, I mean, I guess that's the big takeaway.
Yeah, there is a great depth to this book. And I've taken one quick pass and in the middle of the second more in-depth pass. I highly recommend a read. If we go back to the idea of creating a scenario where soulful and practical can work together in organizations. Mm-hmm. How does that really happen? And how is that something that an organization has to wake up one morning and be? Is that something that can develop?
I think it develops slowly. I think the pandemic actually has made great strides in helping it develop. I'm really impressed. It's one of those things where they say, some things take years and some things happen in an instant. In the pandemic, soulfulness has been brought into organizations. It just has. So there's a great window of opportunity right now. I think a couple of things to think about. One, before I talk, there's the 5 steps to soul that I do talk about that you can use at any level. This can be grassroots. It can be from top down. It can be from wherever. But the one thing to think about too is dissonance and resonance. So when we talk about how we can change and how we can be more soulful, it's just remember it has to be resonant enough with what we do today that it's not offensive and being rejected, but it's got to be dissonant enough to shake things up. So that is a real balance. If you come in, guns a-blazing with something that's completely radical, it'll be rejected. But if you come in too status quo, you're not really making a difference. So it is about balancing those things. But in your question of how do we do this, I mean, this is an intention. So if our belief is work has to suck and we should just all suffer, then you probably won't become soulful. But if you start to look for places to make things more soulful and chip away at it, and that your intention is for work not to suck and also be get great financial results, then you'll find new possibilities. So in the book, I have a 5-step process to soul, which, it lays out the 5 steps just to kind of think through, why is this so soulless and what can we do about it? And what's the within the result we want, within the constraints of the result we're looking for, how can we bring in more soul, and how can we do this and get and accomplish this business goal without being miserable? And then you'll find that when you start to actually think about it, there's always a way.
As we end 2021 and begin 2022, we're at least here in the States, we're in the midst of something that has been branded the Great Resignation. Has that affected people's willingness to help organizations change and become more soulful from the inside? Or are they just leaving and going somewhere else that is more soulful?
The answer is yes to both of those things. Because the Great Resignation it's the perfect example of now it's the power of the collective. People are now woken up to the fact that work's not meeting their soul, like not soulful, and they're not going to take it anymore. To use a quote from, what was that thing? Network.
Yes,
right?
It was Network.
They're not going to take it anymore. They're mad as hell. So are they going somewhere else? Or are they going nowhere? People don't want to have their souls sucked anymore. Life's too short. Mm-hmm. So I think that it is forcing organizations' hand to be more soulful. So are they going to go somewhere that's more soulful? Yeah. And then those places that were sucking people's souls are going to be forced to change or die. And I think that's a good thing.
I think that's fair. If you woke up tomorrow morning with the power to change any 2 things impacting how people and organizations transform, what would those 2 things be and why?
Yeah, from an outcome perspective, I mean, I would just love to wake up tomorrow and see a world where people don't dread going to work. Right? I mean, that's the world I'm looking for, because why should it's not something that we should have to bear and put up with. It should be part of our lives that fulfill us just like every other part of our life. So that's the one. And I guess then I would be out of a job. So second of all,
there would always be something else.
That's true. And then the second thing I would love to see is an organizational structure that supports soulfulness. And I don't think we've cracked that. I don't think we've figured out how to structure a collective in a way that's nourishing and also productive.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting variations on the world, whether be teal or holacracy and things like that. They don't seem to have a ton of traction and we're still stuck back in the wonderful British naval hierarchy kind of strategy from the 1800s. Yeah. I don't know why we have not been able to find something else that works.
We haven't, but we're getting there. We're making headway. I think that holacracy and teal organizations, there's definitely seeds there. They just haven't fully grown yet. So that's something that I look forward to seeing in the next few years. But if I woke up tomorrow, I would love to see that we cracked that.
Jardena London, author of Cultivating Transformations. If people wanted to continue the conversation, if they wanted to find out more about you, how would they go about doing that?
Cultivatingtransformations.com is a great place to start, where we're sort of housing resources and conversation starters about the book and its contents.
At this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you'd like. Obviously, we want people to go out and buy a copy of Cultivating Transformation, a leader's guide to connecting the soulful and practical. Is there anything else that you'd like to promote?
Well, the one other thing I would promote is connect with me on LinkedIn, of course, Jardena London. It's easy to find me. But the other thing I would say is for my consulting services, rosettaagile.com is my professional business website. So go check that out for some of the programs that would carry out these cultivating transformation practices.
Super. We'll have that contact information in the show notes. Jardena, great. This was marvelous and enjoyed it.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it too. Thank you, Tom.
and upcoming events. April 19th, 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. When prioritization goes bad, be there, because you don't want your prioritization to go bad. All kidding aside, I'm looking forward to this webinar and hope to see you in the audience and connect afterwards. Link in the show notes, or go to the greatitpro.org website and register. Hey, this week I have a special call to action. If you're a team lead, I need your help. I believe the team lead role is the least understood and the least talked about in Agile. It's time to change that. I'm working on testing a model of team lead behaviors in Agile. I need examples of real team lead job descriptions anywhere in IT to map into the model. Glittering generalities that you find on the web don't match the reality of what happens in the real world. I do not need anything sensitive like salary or product details. Please don't send anything like that to me. I'll happily share the first cut of the model with anyone that helps and sponsor a virtual meeting to discuss the model with all participants. If you have a team lead job description that you can share, please email me at tcagley@tomcagley.com. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, we are finally going to tackle the difference between prioritization and sequencing. Sequencing is the forgotten cousin of prioritization. However, if you get the order wrong on things, lots of value will be lost. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?